Welcome everyone to the Spirit of the Time Zoomcast. So happy you can join us this Friday afternoon. We will be taking flight with Tom Morris momentarily, right at the top of the hour. And welcome everyone. Welcome to Zeitgeist Design and Production. I'm Becky Kiefer, Studio Director. Just try comparing that pricey new Apple Vision Pro to sailing across the seas of time and space and reliving history or exploring the world of tomorrow. Not even close, right? Here in the Zeitgeist Creative Studio, imagination rules and time is always of the essence. This is where immersion artists Ryan Harmon and Jolene Cicero study the past and spin the present envisioning the future of location-based entertainment, or what we like to call UXIRL, user experiences in real life. The Spirit of the Time Zoomcast offers a sneak peek behind the theme. Each month, we move you without a ride system, inviting one incredibly talented and influential colleague aboard our time machine. We set the controls for milestone moments in that person's career, an attempt to unravel the mystery of what makes a guest experience timely, yet timeless. And because we're live, you can type questions into the chat box, and our passenger will answer them after the hour-long journey. Climbing aboard our time machine today is our very first guest from April 30th, 2021, Tom Morris. For those who have been with us since the start, you know that his inaugural journey only got us to about 1984, Tom's amazing career. So Tom has kindly returned to the time machine to revisit the last 40 years of his career with us, including his work on Disneyland Paris, DisneyQuest, Hong Kong, Disneyland, and Carsland. It's now my pleasure to introduce our time machine pilots, Zeitgeist President and Chief Creative Officer, Ryan Harmon, and Zeitgeist Executive Vice President and Chief Art Director, Jolene Cicero, along with a man who has his own Pirates of the Caribbean style fireflies in his backyard, Tom Morris.
Whoa. Oh my gosh. That was a great sandwich, Tom.
It was really good.
Wait a minute.
Wow.
Where's Joe?
We left him.
Still enjoying the sandwich.
Joe!
You left me behind.
We left Joe in Italy.
Well, he's gonna have some good eating ahead of him.
Joe, did you run
I'm with
into
my
some
family here.
members at the Elf gas
Hey, you bet.
station? Why is your voice so bad, Joe?
from all that vino we've been drinking, Tom.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Wow. All right. Well, Tom, it's a pleasure to have you here on the Time
Great to
Machine.
be back.
Yes, it's been almost exactly 3 years. And we never asked you. A lot of us, like me, when I was a kid, I used to put on shows for the neighborhood kids and parents and make arcades in my room for my friends and write stories. And I knew I was never going to be a mechanic or an astronaut or a lawyer. Was there something for you that was so inspirational as a kid that you just knew your path in life?
Well, yes, I think the first thing I was interested in was probably film and animation, and that probably came out of the Disney films that I would see when I was, say age 5 or 6.
Okay.
Mary Poppins and films of that era, especially Mary Poppins because of all the special effects and the great music.
Yeah.
But also there was a point, I think, where the animation kind of took over as an interest. And that was about the time that well, it wasn't when the Art of Animation book came out, but I think they had a second printing. So suddenly they were in the bookstores.
Right.
And I wanted that book really
Yes,
bad.
I remember.
Yeah.
Oh.
I wanted to learn how to do animation.
Okay.
But the book was $10, a lot of money. So I was told to wait, for my birthday.
Oh.
But subsequently, the Pirates of the Caribbean opened at Disneyland.
Okay.
And of course, I liked Disneyland.
Yeah.
But
you lived nearby?
well, we were in Orange County in
Okay.
Newport, which was 25 minutes away or so. And, we were a once a year Disney family. We'd go to Disneyland once a year. And, but this particular year, 1967, my dad got a job there because he was a high school teacher, and a lot of high school teachers got seasonal jobs at Disneyland. And so I think it was sometime in late April or early May, he started at Disneyland on the Pirates of the Caribbean.
No way.
He wasn't on the absolute crew, but he was on, shortly after that.
Oh, cool.
And so he would tell me about this attraction. It was kind of funny because a few months earlier, we had gone to Disneyland, and my favorite attraction at that time was Tom Sawyer Island.
Okay.
So we were heading over to Tom Sawyer Island, and my dad and mom first wanted to go over to this other area that had just opened up called New Orleans Square.
Right.
And I'm like, that's just a bunch of shops. I want to come on. We got to go to Tom Sawyer Island.
Yeah.
So my sister took me over to Tom Sawyer Island while my parents investigated the beautiful New Orleans Square, which would later become one of my favorite pieces of architecture in the world.
Yeah.
So anyway, one night in the summer, my dad took me to Disneyland, and he was off. He wasn't working that day, but he took me there at night, and Tomorrowland had just opened.
Oh, right.
And
Wow.
Pirates had been open for, a few months by that time. And we went on it, and it blew me away. But, my dad was an art teacher, art English, but also theater craft.
Oh.
So he would do the sets for the high school plays every year.
Okay.
So he knew a little bit about stagecraft, and he would tell me about some of the things. But what blew me away most was after we went down the second drop on Pirates, he said, now we're right under where we started.
Oh, right.
And that just kind of like, you could create magic with architecture, with a building, with, with stage trickery. And so from that point on, I started to think, well, it would be kind of fun to work at this place that my dad told me about called WED.
Right.
But, how many people work there? 200, 250. So I continued to be interested in animation. I finally got the Art of Animation book when it went on sale at Robinson's for $3. I bought 3 of them and then stupidly gave 2 of them away or sold them for the same price to friends of mine, not knowing that they'd become so valuable.
Right.
And and I continued to be interested in Disneyland, and of the Haunted Mansion was the big thing though, because I grew up at Disneyland, once a year, and that mansion was always there.
Yeah.
But when is it going to open? And so that was really intriguing to me, just the
Right.
whole idea of not just a haunted house, but it's inside of a beautiful, beautiful mansion. So what
Right.
kind of a haunted house is that going to be?
Yeah, yeah.
And every year we'd go there. Every year it was closed. Every year there were rumors, you know, either from the employees themselves who would say, "Oh, you know, it's almost ready, but they've got some problems, or they had some problems and they have to start over." And then, you know, without the benefit of the internet or anything, those rumors, because there
Yeah.
were several of them. Someone got scared and had a heart attack. A woman fell in a snake pit. There were all these different, you know, rumors, and they were really strong rumors.
Yeah.
And so that intrigued me even more, you know, that like they're building something and then taking it out and rebuilding it because it's too scary.
Right.
And so that always intrigued me. And then finally it opened, and I went on it about a month or two after it opened.
Okay.
And of course, that was, you know, all of the illusions and everything in there.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, the music,
Oh,
Hall
yeah.
Freeze,
Yeah.
you know, everything was great.
Yeah.
And so that kind of reinforced, but of course, how many Imagineers, you know, can they hire?
Right.
So it wasn't really a realistic dream of
So,
mine.
Tom, were in school, were you taking art classes?
Yeah, I was taking art classes in high school. And, you know, I was always kind of good at basic drawing. And my dad was an arts teacher. He taught me how to use gouache and watercolor. But I was taking drafting in high school. I took 3 years of drafting, you know,
right.
like in preparation of being an architect.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was a senior and I had met some architects, I had decided that that's not what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to more get into illustration. I think it was, you know, some guidance that had been given me by several people.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem exactly like my crowd either. Maybe nowadays it would be, but back then, you know, it was very serious. There was no, all of this kind of environmental, immersive design was considered, you know, foolishness, I think, back then.
Yeah.
This is the 70s, you know.
Yeah.
So I started to take, in college, I started to take illustration classes and film classes and marketing classes. I was a good writer. I knew I could kind of turn a phrase here and there.
Yeah.
And so I started to think of kind of like Madison Avenue kind of things, or filmmaking. It's interesting that my high school counselors in Orange County in Newport, which was supposed to be one of the better school districts in the entire country, and not to bash it or anything, but my counselors kind of like said, "You don't want to get into film. That's over there in Hollywood, and you have to know somebody. It's nepotistic. You have to know somebody." And it's like, well, what about animation? And oh, that's a dying art, you know.
Oh my God.
Which it was really in that moment. At that moment, it was, you know,
that's true.
After Robin Hood, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started thinking more like architecture or something a little more serious. So and I snuck into the studio. It wasn't sneaking, because all you had to have was your Disneyland ID.
Oh, right.
And so me and another ride operator at Disneyland went to the studio one day.
Yeah.
And just walking around, we went into the animation building, and we were looking at, they used to have kind of like the process of animation there in the main hallway, like that National Geographic article, kind of like, you know, step by step. And so we were looking at probably the beautiful backgrounds or something. And all of a sudden, there were like 3 or 4 people surrounding us, listening in on our conversations, because we were being kind of critical about whether we liked, you know, this particular style or not.
Yeah.
And those people were Ron Clements and a guy named Ed Gombert, and possibly John Musker was there too. I don't remember who all they were, but we spent the rest of the
That
kind of
that sounds like that was the right group from that era. Yeah.
yeah. So we spent a couple hours with those guys.
Wow.
They took us around and showed us what they were working on, which was the Fox and the Hound, I believe.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And they took us out on the back lot, and they took us to the commissary, and there was a big kind of like barrel of beer, you know, on ice.
Oh,
It's like, do
really?
you want
Wow.
beer? I'm like, I'm not gonna, you know.
You were
I have to
young then.
drive. I was
Yeah.
probably not even 18.
Yeah.
So that was a fun day. But then by then I had sort of made an acquaintance with Tony Baxter.
Okay.
And so one day he invited me to WED, which was WDI as it was called back then.
Right.
And I spent a day there meeting all of the great people.
Yeah.
Because let's see, I had done, now I'm in college, I think, and I had done some illustrations, some, you know, serious gouache illustrations. And so I was showing those to people like Claude Coates and Clem
Wow.
Hall, and they were impressed.
Yeah.
And, you know, keep it up. You need more work, you know, take a good 2 or 3 or 4 years of drawing and painting, and like, yeah, okay. And just stop me if this is all going way
Yeah.
too long, but so I'm working at Disneyland at the same time,
Right.
and I'm in my second year of college,
Right.
taking film, illustration, marketing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I get a call from someone at Disneyland in personnel. I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And I go in to speak with someone named Stan Soa, and he says, we are gearing up for 3 big projects: EPCOT Center, Tokyo Disneyland, and the studio needs filmmakers and animators.
Oh, wow.
And we have seen your portfolio. So they had a program, a career planning and placement program.
Oh, how cool.
And so in advance, probably in my senior year or my freshman year of college, I had submitted my drafting work from high school and some illustration work and writing and various things. And I just thought that might come in handy in a few years,
Yeah.
you know, when I finish college. But this guy said, we're hiring right now and we need draftspeople. We need draftsmen.
Right.
And we've seen your portfolio, and we believe that you would make a good, you know, addition to WED.
Wow.
I'm like, as an architect or what? It's like as a junior draftsman,
Right.
you know, and that could be lead into other things, but and it turned out it was show set design. So I interviewed with George Windrum.
Okay.
And I had Tony Baxter then officially on my resume that I had, or my application that I had.
Right.
So I had him as a reference, and he had taken me around, I think, by that time.
Yeah.
So I had met some of these folks, and it's like, we want you to start in January, you know, first of the year.
Oh.
And I was just only in my second year at Cal State Fullerton.
Oh. So you had
I'm
to
like,
quit college.
You know, so I wasn't, you know, on board necessarily right away, like with this idea. Like, I gotta, you know, talk to people.
Yeah.
And I talked with Tony and some other people from Disney, and they said, you know, this is all starting up now, and when it's going to end is around 1982 or 83, and that's when, you know, you'll be graduating.
Right.
So you know, maybe you ought to do this now and get the experience and then go back to school.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, you know, at the very least, it'll be fun. I'll get to go to WED every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And get paid for it. And so I did. And I started working right away. Surprisingly, you know, right away on, I think, the World of Motion.
Yeah.
You know, the first week you do things like letter set labeling and Pantone coloring, and you know, I did that for maybe a week and before I was suddenly on the World of Motion with I think Claude Coates was the one who was giving me the direction.
Wow.
It's kind of funny because the World of Motion had, I think, 4 or 5 people that thought they were the art directors. So Claude, I think, was really the art director. Mark Davis had already done his illustrations for it, and was kind of being brought back here and there to infill some of the scenes. So I started on the Greek, or the invention of the wheel scene. So I just did 2 buildings in there, the Greek temple and the Chinese pagoda.
Yeah.
And then I was asked to come up with an idea for a scene. It was to involve hot air balloons. And it was this little scene in between 2 other scenes that I guess they didn't realize immediately would need a scene.
Oh, okay.
And so Claude's idea was to celebrate hot air balloons, and I was given a bunch of books on hot air balloons from the great library that's there.
Yeah.
And I came up with an idea for a guy in a hot air balloon with like a couple goats in the basket and a steeple, some kind of a monument or steeple where the guy has a sword, on the top, a statue.
That's funny.
And so the hot air balloon is gonna hit that.
Right.
And then the goats are like, and then there's some little, it was supposed to be France, located in France. So I did some little half timber buildings. And then I showed it to Claude, I guess, and I think he felt it was too subtle or too, not a quick enough read.
Oh, okay.
And so then they brought Mark.
Good lesson.
They brought Mark in to do that piece of it, which involved a guy with a wig and a pig. I think it ended up with a pig.
Oh.
And he's just waving. I think it could have worked with
yeah.
But it's not a very long scene. You're in there for 10 seconds maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the buildings that I designed for it were in there.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of weird. Like, is that all you do, is you just draw it and they are going to build it? They're not going to say you're too young to be involved in designing stuff, or, you have to work your way up to that.
Right.
No, they just, next thing I know, they're building a model of it. And
wow.
And then I hardly ever saw it in the show because I was always so busy.
Yeah.
I cycled through that show maybe 6 or 7 times.
Oh.
And never compared, like it was, because it was already in the past.
Right.
And I was involved in Journey into Imagination. So not long after that, I did a little bit of work for the Land Pavilion. And then not long after that, at the last minute, Kodak came on board.
For Imagination.
Yeah. Have we already covered this?
Yeah, I was going to say.
We have. Let's
Yeah,
move
yeah, I
forward.
think
A little
Yeah.
forward.
Mhm.
So we know you worked
Yeah,
on
let's
World of Motion.
Move the
Journey into
controls to
Imagination.
95.
Yeah, you worked on Splash Mountain, Star Tours, the Neon Mickey.
Right.
And of course, you designed the castle for Disneyland Paris.
Right.
Did
we
on a napkin sketch? I think we talked about that, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Tissue paper.
And oversaw Fantasyland. So let's move the machine now to like 1995, and we are. It seems like we're in the future because this is so ahead of its time. Tell us about DisneyQuest, the theme park in a box.
Okay, so at the conclusion of the added capacity program for Disneyland Paris, which was a quick program to add 10 additional attractions.
Wow.
In the first 2 years.
Wow.
To get the capacity up.
Yeah.
I came home and was assigned to work with Joe D'Annunzio,
Right.
who was the newly appointed vice president of new business development, something like that.
Okay.
And he was tasked with coming up with
like out of berm experiences.
Yeah, there were 2 different names for them, but basically local regional entertainment.
Right.
Location-based entertainment.
Yeah.
Regional.
They were doing
entertainment.
Burbank,
Right.
all that kind of stuff.
And the reason that he was hired, and that was so important, was a declaration had been made sometime in 1995 after Space Mountain opened and the park was still having problems. I think Space Mountain helped, but it was still financially underwater.
Yeah.
So Peter Rummel had come on board as the head of the combined Disney Development Company and Walt Disney Imagineering, and he kind of declared, as did other people at the high levels of WDI, we're no longer in the theme park business. I just remember like, what?
Oh, I see.
Well, no, they didn't say it that way. They said
Yeah.
no theme parks.
Right.
We'll add to the
Right.
ones that we've got.
Right.
But
Wow.
the theme park market internationally is saturated.
Wow.
So now we're going to look at these things called location-based entertainment.
Okay.
And so Joe D'Annunzio and I together for several months, it was just the two of us, I think. And then we slowly started to bring other people on board. But, and I was so green in terms of anything having to do with digital or, I mean, I used a computer for email, but
yeah,
I didn't know the difference between a modem and
and the technology was not really there at that point. I mean,
No.
I think we were still using the little Macs with the,
Yeah.
full-length screens and floppy disks.
Right. So I had to kind of immerse myself. I was really into video games, in high school.
Okay.
Arcade machines.
Right. We're talking asteroids.
Arg and Tron was okay, but what
Yeah.
was the one that I really loved was Battlezone.
Oh, Battlezone.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Oh my God. And I got really good at that. But then, I kind of fell out of that. So I had to re-immerse myself into that world.
Yeah.
And I think at first we were talking with Sega. It was either we were talking to Nintendo and Sega. We ended up going to Japan and meeting with the Sega folks. I think by then we had brought on board Jan Circus and some of his very talented people. And it was a really interesting time, at WDI and just kind of, politically dealing with folks that thought we were out of the theme park business, basically.
Yeah.
And now we're pushing this other thing. And so we came up with these zones right away. We came up with the idea to be different, really, I think.
Yeah.
Was that we were going to creatively organize it by verbs rather than by geography or by time.
Okay.
So we knew, yeah, and I had just learned the term psychographic. So I'm like, we're going to design this thing psychographically. Oh, that impressed some people.
Yeah, big word.
Yeah, big word, and they're all looking it up. Oh, yeah.
So what were the zones?
The zones were, and this was based purely on I think the observations of Jan Circus and myself.
Okay.
Having visited arcades and doing all this research, we needed an area that was the testosterone kind of like the hardcore gamers where you're scoring
fighting
and competing.
Yeah.
So that was Score,
Okay.
and it would be designed after comics, after Marvel and
okay.
it wasn't specifically Marvel, but it was that creative look,
Yeah.
that design sensibility.
Right.
And then we had a creative zone for people who wanted to do creative things, and it was called Create. And then we had Explore.
Okay.
Like
virtual jungle cruise.
Yes, and that little Indiana Jones remote control Jeep
Okay.
thing. And then we had one called Replay, which was bring back the old games, but in kind of in many cases in a new way.
Right.
And Toy Story was about to come out. Oh my God, I remember one executive saying that thing is going to be a dog.
Wow. Executives are so brilliant.
Yeah, because we're not WDI executives.
Yeah.
And so that came out, and Pizza Planet was like a huge inspiration.
right.
I love the style of that, and use those little Martians somewhere like Wacka Martian or something.
Yeah.
And so once we kind of got those areas defined, then we went back to Japan, and that's, I guess, when we met with Sega. But we went to some of the Japanese big box arcades that were also kind of zoned, that also had a little lands in them. Joypolis was the name of one of them.
Yeah.
And we went to two of those, and it kind of reinforced everything that we had been thinking.
Yeah.
They were, a little bit ahead of the curve. I don't know what their organizing principles were And some of it was all very hit and miss. Some of the stuff was really cool and some of it was lame. So we learned a little bit from that. We created that based on Toy Story, the Astro Blasters,
Right.
with shooting the balls out. Or
Right.
I guess they were large, like basketball
It was
size.
super fun. I love
Yeah.
So you did one in Orlando, then they did one
There
in
was so
Chicago.
much
Right.
fun.
Why do you
But-
think it didn't work?
Well, because of the reinvestment. Well, I think there were a lot of factors involved,
Yeah.
including dumb factors, not invented by me, kind of, it didn't happen under my purview. Now, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking
Right,
about
right.
whoever might have taken over
Oh,
the
okay.
theme parks division at that time.
Right.
And this was like an orphan from the previous
Oh,
regime.
yeah, okay.
So there isn't quite the passion
Oh,
to give it a chance.
Right.
So the Chicago was a disaster because it was just empty from Monday to Friday.
Oh, right, yeah.
The seasonality really killed it.
Yeah.
The one in Florida was very successful.
Yeah.
And but then after the first couple of years, what we knew was going to happen
Right.
began to happen. Originally, the business plan included like a 20% reinvestment every year. Like every
Oh.
year, one of
Right.
those zones is going to get.
Yeah, because technology is
Yeah.
changing so quickly. You
Exactly,
gotta- yeah.
exactly. And that was thrown out.
So it sat there. and
Right.
Never changed.
And it was, I think the idea was just keep it going as long as it's making money.
Right.
And then when it stops making money, we'll
Yeah, I remember. 'cause-
unplug it.
Yeah, new tech came in,
Yeah.
higher definition, better computer,
Right.
and it was still like it looked like the 80s.
Yeah,
kind of
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
There were some things that were added. First of all, it wouldn't have been successful without Joe Garlington. He is the best. He understands the interactive mentality and behavior of guests when they're in a park.
Okay.
It's a completely different thing when you're, maybe in an arcade that you're going to repeat over and over again.
Right.
It's a completely different thing, obviously, at home
Yeah.
when you're alone. So the behaviors of guests playing, gaming basically in a vacation resort environment requires a different process
Yeah.
and strategy, and he got that right away. So all of those, almost all of those, were invented by Joe and his team of really good people.
Right. Cool.
I did come up with one idea, which was the design and ride your own roller coaster.
Oh, that's right. The barf box.
Which I received a patent
Oh,
for,
cool.
along with
Congratulations.
others. But
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah.
So let's move to
Okay.
2001. And Disney decides they're going to do a theme park in Hong Kong, which at this point may or may not have been a great idea. So tell us how you rebuilt the original Main Street USA and the original Disneyland Castle and created this whole
Well,
park.
There weren't a lot of choices given to us as a team. I think it was John DeSantis and myself as the producer and the creative director.
Yeah.
Brought in, I think, in 2001, and there had been another team working on it, doing some good work on it. But this was one of those projects that started as an LBE.
Oh.
And grew, unfortunately, like the studio second gate in Paris. It was the same exact thing. It's an LBE, and so you're designing it as an LBE, and all of a sudden someone decides, no, it's going to be a full gate.
And both were during the Paul Pressler era.
That's true.
And had you already worked on the second gate for Paris?
Yes.
Okay, we forgot that. Okay.
Yeah, and we can continue to forget it too.
Yeah, okay.
No, it was actually a very fun project, and we had some really, great ideas. But the problem was that it was meant to be an LBE, and then they said, no, it's going to be a gate, and we said, great, more money, and they said, no more money.
Is that why it was a box? Because it was going to be an LBE, like mostly in the box?
Well, originally it was going to be just animation related, and that was just me trying to sell that idea for about 3 or 4 years. And one day there was a pitch an idea to Michael Day, probably around 1996, and I think it was just me
Oh, wow.
and some, you know, beautiful renderings that were done by some folks to do a art of animation, animation station, animation celebration, whatever it
Right,
was.
right.
But it was a big box. It was the size. It was, the idea was it was like, you know, the scope of DisneyQuest,
Okay.
but it was all based on animation,
Okay.
the history, the future, do it yourself,
Right.
all of that. And everyone loved that idea. It kept, you know, the finance people based in Paris liked the idea
Yeah.
a lot. And so one day there was pitch it to Michael. And so I pitched it to Michael and he loved it. He said, great. I thought that was great. And
Yeah.
then the next day we hear it's going to be a gate. And it's
Oh,
kind of, oh,
okay.
but no more money.
So you have to do a whole theme park on the budget of a family entertainment center and LBE.
Right.
Wow.
So we brought on Jan Circus came on board and his team, and we did some really good work, I think, but it was very frustrating because there were people involved with it that were not experienced theme park people. I'm not talking about from a design standpoint, but from a decision
Right.
standpoint at the upper levels, not at WDI in California, but people involved with trying to keep Disneyland Paris afloat in
Yeah.
Paris. And so they had different ideas about what it should be.
Yeah.
And so there was a frustrating 2 or 3 years in there while we developed that project. And it was designed to grow into, I mean, there was a master plan at one time
Okay.
that would have made sense out of what was there at opening day, but
Yeah.
that went by the wayside.
Oh.
Okay, so now Hong Kong Disneyland,
Hong Kong.
it's kind of a similar thing in a way because it was, well, you know, Joe Lancicero, I believe, started it
Oh, really? You
with
worked on
the
Hong Kong
balloon
Disneyland?
show that got everyone excited
Right.
about Disney's presence there.
Right.
We can't hear him.
Yeah, we can't hear Joe.
Are you muted?
We can't hear you, Joe.
There I am. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, they were trying to figure out, how Asian audiences would respond to the Disney product because they were only exposed to it through consumer products. So Mickey Mouse was a plush toy, some
right.
anime too. So we did this crazy traveling show to see how a live or dimensional Disney experience might work. And it started first in Singapore, and then we went to Taipei, and then we were supposed to go to Hong Kong. And for various reasons, which would be take up a whole show itself, the thing went away. But it did kind of set the groundwork for looking around that part of the world and where a Disney park would make sense.
Yeah, because it wasn't long after that, then there was a team assembled to come up with an LBE for Hong Kong. And it was an I don't know if it started indoors, but it turned into basically a small park, you know, like a little regional park.
Right.
And it had an Adventureland, I think, in it. And it had, you know, Fantasyland and a little, maybe it was more of a little miniature Toontown or something. And the castle, which I thought was very creative, was kind of done in the style that Rolly Crump designed the facade of It's a Small World with. So it was kind of saying, this is not Disneyland.
Right.
This is right. There was no Rivers of America or anything.
Yeah.
And so it was, it was maybe even less than a half a day, maybe a 4-hour park or something like that.
Yeah.
So then one day it wasn't. One day it was to become a full gate.
Right.
And suddenly John DeSantis and I were put in charge of that. And we were kind of perplexed, like, if are you calling it Disneyland? Because if you're calling it Disneyland now, then it's got to deliver.
Right.
And it turned out, yes, we're going to call it Disneyland, and but it's got to be scaled for a smaller attendance level.
Right.
And less than half of what a typical Disneyland would be.
Right.
And so again, we went through kind of a frustrating period where WDI had our backs, but not necessarily other divisions of the company at the time.
Yeah.
And by that, I just simply mean when we worked on Disneyland Paris, we had people like Jim Cora, and even, Dick Nunes above Jim Cora, who had years and years and years of practical experience and knowledge, and who had an intuition about what kinds of attractions,
from an operations
standpoint. From an operations standpoint. And, this attraction called Space Mountain is popular. It's popular in all of our locations. It, continues to be. Same with Big Thunder, same with Pirates, same with Mansion. But then we had some doubting Thomases. I'm supposed to be the doubting Thomas. There were a lot of doubting Thomases. And so we went around in circles with the menu for longer than, in my opinion, should be done. And we heard some funny things like,
scary, right?
Oh yes, we heard all of this.
Chinese don't like ghosts, and
Chinese don't like ghosts. Chinese, they don't want to get wet. They don't want to participate in parades or shows. They're very shy. They don't like chocolate. They don't like candy, but they like mooncakes. And meanwhile, we're spending almost half our time out there surrounded by chocolate and mooncakes in a water park called Ocean Park. And we're like, and I began to kind of see that this was kind of a game of opposites. Like, oh, whatever we propose is not going to be what they're going to want to do. Which I learned, it was a lesson I learned, which is you do have to be a little more participatory with folks, even if they're not as knowledgeable as you are. Maybe let them make the first pitch about what the menu should be and then come around to what. So yes, I learned that strategy the hard way. So it was a challenging project. It was a difficult project. It was a wonderful project because the people working on it were great. In the design and production end of it. And I thought it needed a little more experienced help on the operational side. We did have some good people there. And now, of course, they've grown to become as good as any of the other operations groups. But it was tough dealing with every issue: food, merchandise, entertainment, flower. It was
a different world. It was like an alien planet for you guys.
In a way, and yet there were so many similarities too. It was like, there's things that are very different and things that are very similar. Like everyone is going to like fireworks. Everyone is going to. I think everyone. Yeah, that's true. Everyone's going to like scary. Something scary. That's just people like that. Ability to be scared and then survive the challenge. And so it was really difficult to get some of that through. And we didn't have things initially when John DeSantis and I started. The biggest attraction, I'm trying to think what it was like the Temple of Peril. I don't know that we had any big box attractions. It was all the newest things that we had done. So it would have been the Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters and the Temple of Peril and Toontown.
Did they go back to the original 1950s castle in Main Street just because the drawings were done? It was smaller scale than Florida and Tokyo. So let's just do it.
Yes, and the rationale was, well, this is Walt's. This has Walt's fingerprints on it. And so this is, an homage to the original Walt. And I wanted to do, of course, a different castle.
You had just designed the one for Paris. You can come up with a unique Chinese.
But they had the drawings in the drawer, and the drawings were still, pretty legitimate. They didn't need much modification to be brought up to code. I mean, other people probably know a little bit more about that than I do, but the idea was that pretty much you lift the drawings. And which was kind of neat because we got a couple buildings that are no longer at Disneyland. Like the old Beacons locker building that's kind of Dutch style, which I miss from Disneyland, but we got to build it in Hong Kong. But yeah, I think I even did some sketches for, I know I did some sketches for the castle, but didn't, like I never got the vibe that it was going to be okay to show those.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I should have, but
Yeah.
I mean, they were dead set that everything was going to be a lift, which of course never turns out to be the case.
Yeah.
All
right.
Yeah. So then John DeSantis and I one day said, we've got to make this park bigger and better. You can't open a park without Space Mountain
Small World
and Small World and you're right.
Yeah.
So we went into Paul Pressler's office and we said, we think we need to do the Jungle Cruise.
Yeah.
We need a big river. We need to do Space Mountain. Main Street needs to be Main Street with the 4 blocks and Town Square, because I think we had a shorter version of it.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what else we added. And it's like, yeah, I agree. And so that's as easy as it was. It was
Does
just,
he give you more money then?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
yeah, we got more money.
Okay. Okay.
And because I guess he was waiting for someone to raise their hand. Well, no one's raising their hand. So yeah, so we got that. And so that was good.
Yeah.
There was still arguments about, it was funny because I got in a tangle with someone on the Disney side, on the operational side, before the group that would eventually be the group operating it. This was still in the kind of planning stages.
Yeah.
And he was like, why do you want to do Space Mountain? It's so outdated. I'm like, well, what are you suggesting? Rock and Roller Coaster. We just opened up Rock and Roller Coaster. I go, but we're building Tomorrowland.
Right.
And Rock and Roller Coaster is just a big box. It doesn't add to the environment. Space Mountain actually is a landmark.
Yeah.
It's something you aspire to.
Yeah,
it's something you
iconic.
see in the distance, something you want to buy a replica of. And he said, well, why don't we do Rock and Roller Coaster and we'll call it Space Mountain?
Oh God.
And like, well, so we would make it Space Mountain with the dome and everything. No, you build Rock and Roller Coaster and
just
you
build the box.
Yeah.
We'll call it Space Mountain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we could paint it to look like
Oh my God.
Space Mountain. So this was the kind of,
Wow.
we're entering a new realm.
Yeah. Home Depot realm.
Yeah. And I mean, this was similar. I remember on the second gate where it was like they had just invented what were they, the prints, you could do a rendering and
Right. Big vinyl.
do big vinyl print.
Yeah.
And so we'll just do boxes and then you can just do a themed print of whatever the subject matter is inside. And you're like, oh.
Hey, do you think the pendulum swung back because of Harry Potter, what Universal did, creating something fully immersive and detailed when Disney had been at the other end of that
Partly,
spectrum?
but I think the pendulum started swinging back earlier.
Okay.
I think when after Hong Kong opened, Bob Iger had come on board, and so did John Lasseter, and John Lasseter had become the chief creative officer. And I think John did a lot of good convincing that it was time for Disney to get back to basics.
Well, that's our segue into 2007 when you were overseeing Carsland and Radiator Springs Racers, which is kind of the antithesis of what was happening in Hong Kong. Now you have this beautiful, massive rock work, and tell us about that.
Well, it was fun, and there was Kathy Mangum and myself initially. But actually, I have to say that the core idea of the ride came from Robert Coltrane and Kevin Rafferty.
Oh, cool.
It wasn't based on Pixar's Cars, but it was a race. It was a race, through different environments. Because I think before it became Cars Land, it was just a land that was devoted to the car culture, Southern California car culture. That's why it belongs in Disney's California Adventure.
I always wondered that.
Yeah. So it had the diner, and it had really all of the elements of Cars, but Cars hadn't quite come out yet, I guess, when it was conceived. So now Cars is out, And
serendipity. Now you have a IP to put on
yeah,
that land.
yeah.
Wow.
So for some reason I was brought on board. And I think because, you know, partly because I know how to, I'm really good at laying out a ride. There's other people that are also good at it.
Yeah.
But I'm good at also looking at it from a timing, second by second by second by second.
Right.
And that was something I learned from the art of animation called the exposure sheet.
Wow.
And
That's right.
I had applied the exposure sheet mentality to Journey into Imagination with a revolving show that was in there.
Right.
It had to be timed perfectly for all of the effects and illusions to work right. You couldn't just go, okay, we'll figure it out later.
Oh.
I had to break it down second by second. We had a rotating disc that I made from a brown line.
Oh.
And broken down into seconds, and the script would be written with respect to where you're going to be every second, because you have to lay out projectors in the back that are going to do things at a special moment.
Yeah.
And so that was timed out to the second, worked out to I can't remember how many seconds it was at the time. I wish I did. I don't know whatever happened to that thing. I haven't seen it in the Disney collection. But it was a pretty cool little thing. We used it, you know. And so I did the same thing for Radiator Springs Racers, and now easier to do with you know, numbers and Excel spreadsheets.
Did you have to go on a research trip to?
Yeah, so we went to 8 of us. I think it was 8 of us. Kathy, myself, Kevin Rafferty, and 2 folks from Pixar, Roger Gold.
And Liz?
Yeah, and Liz Gazzano.
Yeah.
And a few other people. It was great. Maybe it was 12 of us. And the greatest thing was the tour was led by Michael Wallace, who is the voice of Sheriff in the film, and also the leading expert on the Mother Road, Route 66.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And so that was wonderful. We got to meet the people that inspired the characters.
Wow,
We were duplicating a trip that was taken by the Pixar animation team, you know, years earlier.
Yeah.
In order to make the film. So we met the guy who was the inspiration for Maynard, and we met we went to the halfway, what was it called, cafe. We met a lot of people. It was great. It was a wonderful trip. I'd have to go back through all my photos now.
Yeah.
But we went from a little place in Oklahoma, you know, all the way to, we didn't go all the way to Santa Monica.
Yeah.
But we went to, what's the name of the town with the mules in California, where there's mules walking around just all over the place? I forgot the name of it. It was really cool though.
Wow.
That was where the trip ended.
Okay.
I'll remember it. Someone out, I'm sure in the audience knows.
Yeah.
But it is an old Western town with mules all over the place. That was a great trip. We all had a lot of fun. We learned a lot. It really influenced the project.
Yeah.
And things we saw on that trip, you know, became integrated into the land and into the attractions.
Yeah. So since that time, you've become sort of a Walt Disney Imagineering historian. You took on the D23 Expo and designed one of the coolest pre-show experiences I've ever seen. And did you design the booth multiple years and all the?
Yes, I led the design of the Imagineering. Well, I guess it was the Parks and Resorts overall exhibits in 2011 and 13. Tim Delaney had done it for 2009. That was the first ever D23 Expo, and he did that great thing with a screen that split open.
Oh yeah.
At the end of I think they showed some reels from the old Disneyland TV show.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to top that.
Of course.
Well, I was inspired by it.
Yeah.
So I worked on those 2. And, you know, in the process of that, I you know, got a lot of research. I mean, not only did I gain the knowledge in my head, but I also just had the material research as well, and began to think that it would make a neat book. But I wasn't thinking about Imagineering. I was thinking about a real deep dive into the evolution of Disneyland.
Okay.
Almost National Geographic style.
Okay.
You know, where you start before anyone arrived on the land.
So tell us about the book you've
so that has evolved for a number of reasons, serendipitous reasons, evolved really into the archaeology of Imagineering, the deep dive history of Imagineering from basically the first 20 years, from the beginning of 53 to around 73, a couple of years after they have Walt Disney World up and running. And also a period of transition. That was a period of transition from the first gen to the second gen.
Right.
So you had second geners coming in, as early as the late 60s, folks like Tony and Kim Irvine, started coming in around 1969, 70, 71.
Yeah.
And then there was a big, surge later in that decade. But I cut off in around 1973. I start in 53, but I backtracked to 52 because I found out some things that we've been told over and over and over again that turn out not to be completely true.
Wow.
And so which is kind of fun. You track down kind of the provenance of a story and find out it's really just coming from one person 20 years after the fact.
Right.
And now it's become, it's become canon, and you find out, in most cases, what really happened is just as interesting, if not more interesting.
Right.
But so I actually start this in 1952. WED was officially formed at the end of 52. But the people that were involved is amazing. I mean, that's why I did this book, because I fell down a rabbit hole. And I mean, how many people do you think were at WED at the very beginning to design Disneyland?
Not many, probably 20, 30.
So it took about 115 Imagineers to draft, design, sketch up Disneyland. And then there was a small group of outside engineers, and a small group of vendors like Aero Development.
Right.
But it's a number that's quantifiable.
Wow.
If you wanted to even go further, you could probably figure out the man hours that it took. But
you met all these people. You met people who we'd never heard of before. Right?
I met some of them. Most of them are not with us anymore. Talking 1954, but I did personally meet some of them and speak with them on the phone. And there were a lot of people that went on to some pretty amazing things afterwards. One of them is Dean Tavalaris, who is the production designer for Coppola. He designed all of Coppola's films and was nominated 5 times for an Oscar, and won once or twice. And he's in the Art Directors, Hall of Fame, and the AFI, Art Director of the Year.
So what did he do for Disneyland?
Well, he was there from 54 he was at Disney until 64, but he made a full transition into film when WED left the studio and moved to Glendale. So he was doing almost all exclusively Disneyland work from 54 to 61. Well, he also did double duty and was assistant art director on Parent Trap and Zorro and some of the other films of that era. But he was always brought back to work. He worked on almost every Disneyland project, because now I've gone through all of the construction drawings, looking at the names of who the draftsmen were. And he's virtually on every project. So I interviewed him, and he's not, at the time he was 90, he's now 94, I believe. And he remembered Fred Jurger and Bill Martin. I mean, he remembered them all, just about. And what they did. And he had the interesting job of being the field coordinator for the Matterhorn. From a architectural show set design standpoint. He was the one who had to go through every morning and make sure that the plaster or the steel or the wood or the track is it's not infringing on the clearance envelope. And if it was, he had to work on the a change order to correct that. But he did the key elevations for the mansion house, the mansion itself. Fascinating story how he even started. I don't think we have time to get into all of that, but it was something he fell into, and then became one of the greatest film art directors in history. But there were others like that too.
What's the name of the book? We know yet?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a 4-part series
okay.
because it's technically a monograph.
Okay.
And a monograph has like a template to it. It's not to exceed.
Oh.
A monograph is a kind of a scholarly or academic look at a particular.
So it's not a coffee table photo book.
Oh, lots of photos.
Yeah.
It will look like a coffee table book.
Okay. Okay.
And when you get all 4 of them together, it will be definitely a big coffee table book. But no, I found photos that have never been seen before. I'm still receiving them.
You went to the Library of Congress?
I went to the Library of Congress. I heard from them again the other day, and they sent another batch of photos that are incredible.
That's exciting.
And but it's not just Library of Congress. There's, things to be found everywhere. I found some amazing things at USC and UCLA and University of Central Florida. And there's some things in the Midwest that I've got to go out and look at. And but it's amazing, we have never really heard about the early days. We've seen a dozen photos, published and kind of recycled over and over again. So we think, oh, WED was Harper Goff and Harriet Burns and Fred Jerger and Mark Davis, which Mark didn't start till 1960. Herbie. Herbie was there from the beginning, but people don't know about Dick Irvine, who was the most important person at the time, who made WED what it was because of his knowledge in the film industry of who in the industry does what, and his relationship with the other art departments at all the other studios. So the other fallacy is that WED was composed of people from the Disney studio, set designers and backlot building designers, et cetera, art directors. And people forget that there was no art department or live action films at that time. Just finished 20,000 Leagues, which was basically a crew that Harper Goff brought over from Warner Brothers. And those set designers stayed on and became the first set designers at WED. And then another huge group from 20th Century Fox and from Warner Brothers. It was actually forbidden that Walt use his own people because of the deal. The separation of church and state, if you will. They were in the process. They were not making. The studio was always in debt, kind of in the 40s and early 50s, and they were just coming out of it. And they had started up these big projects like 20,000 Leagues and Lady and the Tramp, which was in CinemaScope, and they were starting up Sleeping Beauty and starting up TV. So they needed all the resources in the Disney studio to do those, not to do Disneyland, which the studio only had a partial interest in.
So when can we expect the book?
Well, it's in production now, the first volume. And I don't know because of all of the reviews. And first of all, I'm having lots of people look this over. I mean, people who are even fussier than I am. Okay, there may be.
That's hard to believe.
This, it has end notes and everything.
And
but my part of it is finished, and now it's and I did do a preliminary layout for it. And it's being that layout is being tweaked a bit. And then it's got to go through Disney legal and proper channels. And because of the pandemic, some of those channels are backed up right now. So there's some books ahead of me. And so I'm hoping by the end of the year.
Oh, that'd be great.
So
Tom, with your 40 plus years at Disney, do you have any philosophies you can share with?
Oh my God, that's another book. I'm going to do another book.
Give us 1 minute or 2 minutes of great philosophies or things you've learned.
Oh God, I didn't.
Hench's theories about the power of image and survival mechanics.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think there are 2 or 3 Imagineers from the past whose advice needs to kind of go into a book. Tony Baxter, John Hench, but all of them have some really neat little pearl, I think, to add. And Harper Goff's his life story about how he got to where he is just a good lesson in general, not for Imagineering, you know, strictly, but just his, you know, he grew up poor. Most of these people grew up poor.
Wow.
And figured out some way to get into the business.
Yeah.
And so Harper was benefited greatly by the WPA programs, you know, that came out of the Depression.
Right.
And oh gosh, but you know, Hench, his philosophies about survival, you know, everything goes back to some sort of survival mechanic.
Is that the reassurance part?
Yeah, it's the reassurance and the, you know, anything from a doorway. The way a doorway looks, is it dark behind the doorway or is it light behind the doorway?
Okay.
A walkway, does the walkway provide promise that there's something around the corner that you can't see, or does it tell you right off, turn around, there's nothing, there's, you know, nothing to see or nothing you want to see here.
Right.
So all of those mechanics are very kind of complicated, I mean, because it involves color and shape and form. And so you really have to kind of, you know, I suggest reading that book that he did with Peggy Van Pelt 20 years ago, whenever it was, because it's still I think relevant. I mean, these, you know, it's the DNA, it's getting back to the DNA of what made Disneyland and other places, because you look at certain places, there's a certain quality. The architect, no, I just forgot his name. I think he just passed away too. He said, he called it there's a certain quality that you can't name when you walk into a square in the middle of Bruges and there's a canal there, or when you go to the Venetian canals in Italy. There's a certain something that you can't explain and you can't measure. And so, you know, I want to, at some point, I'd like to begin measuring or attempting to at least chronicle all of those best practices and things that are eternal, not things that are today, you know, is the thing. And, you know, like VR on a roller coaster. How's that working out?
It didn't.
Real well. Oh, wait. Whoops.
But, you know, there's a moment in time where, yes, we're going to do VR on a roller coaster. It's going to be groundbreaking. Like some of the stuff in DisneyQuest, some of it was groundbreaking and then what wasn't, and some of it was groundbreaking and might still be great, and some of it was old-fashioned too.
Right.
I mean, you know, we did kind of like the high-tech version of a claw machine. You know, and now I see that idea being replicated, you know, where you, instead of a physical machine, it's done digitally, but then something physical comes out.
I saw one where they put you on the claw and they hover you over stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You could like grab.
Oh, I love that. But, you know, I think a lot of things do come back to kind of physical things that are, you know, visceral and you can touch. Doing the combination of the two, I think is really kind of the best thing that I can imagine. But yeah, with these, you know, and then Tony has a whole set of new theories that I think are relevant as well, as do other folks. And it would just be great to get all of those together.
That would be amazing.
And learn from those.
Or you could just watch our past episodes of the Spirit of the Time Zoomcast.
Right.
And we're out of time.
And we've got to wrap things up.
Oh,
so
no.
We have to ask you that eternal burning question, Tom, with all of your experience and all these great projects and all these amazing people you've worked with. What do you think makes a guest experience timely yet timeless?
There's a certain quality that you can't name. And I just remember, you know, my early days going to Disneyland, it wasn't about necessarily the latest thing or the biggest thing or the fastest thing. There was something when you walked in, you went, I want to be here. I want to stay here. There's something that I feel better about myself. I feel open to talking more. You know, people talk to strangers when they normally don't. And so it's being taken to another place that you can't access from your home for you can't access every day.
Hmm.
So it does involve nostalgia. Nostalgia somehow has really gotten a bad rap lately. And that's, I saw that starting to happen in areas of Disney back in the 90s. Where DisneyQuest, we were fighting to do the replay zone.
Oh,
where
right.
there was a strategic planning person who kept fighting that, like, why do you have to have that? And it turned out to be the most popular, according to the operator of the
right.
Establishment. It was the most popular.
Right.
So there's a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of hope for the future or ambition for the future.
Yeah.
And I think having those elements together, is turns into a well-rounded experience.
Yeah.
But I was never like the historian, but now I'm like turning into the historian and the appreciation of the history,
Right.
which is what Disneyland opened as an homage to a lot of history.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's very true.
Also people forget that people say, oh, it was all based on Walt's IP. Only
No.
Fantasyland, not even Frontierland, because as I found out doing my book, Davy Crockett wasn't started until well after they had already decided on doing Frontierland.
Yeah. Well, last question, because we've talked about this personally before. Nowadays, everybody hangs an IP on everything. Disney used to be more human aspirations. I want to fly through space. I want to go through a haunted house. Universal was where you rode the movies.
Right.
Now, Disney is a movie or a TV show on every single new attraction. And that has led developers around the world to believe that if they invest in an IP, sometimes it's the most random thing, a video game or some cartoon or something old, but they think that's going to help them be successful. What do you tell those people?
I don't know what I tell them, but what they're doing is they're relying on a crutch. It's like a safety blanket.
Yeah.
And because they don't really understand the alchemy of, this is what we build are organisms, and there's science involved, and there's business involved, and there's entertainment involved, and there's art involved. And why I'm kind of a Disney snob is because those kinds of disciplines were all blended together, and everyone at one point, it seemed like, understood what the other person's, or the importance of the other person's role.
Right.
And now it seems to have maybe broken into, it's a little more siloed, and it's like, oh, the art people, oh, the business people, oh, the science, the industrial engineers or whatever.
Yeah.
And the industrial engineers are not always right, but they're good to have in your ear, basically. And the art people aren't always right, because it's more about entertainment than it is about art.
Yeah.
So I have witnessed and experienced a lot of really well done, unappealing things.
Really well done.
In the last, well done, well written, well executed, and it's a one-time deal.
Yeah.
Because I'm not compelled
to
return to it, because it's missing something.
Yeah, timeless.
Yeah. Timeless.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, back to animation, you learn about appeal. It's character appeal. And we all love Sleeping Beauty for a lot of reasons, because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
But it was also missing something too.
Yeah.
And so you can't just go in it all for the art, and you can't just go in it all for the 100% entertainment, because you might be missing something, or you might be missing something obvious. Like, you can't have a film that's just all laughs.
Right.
You've got to have
some
the spectrum. Yeah. And trying to go through and genetically engineer some of these things, so it's just like, take this part out because that part's boring. Well, you have to have the landscaping. People aren't taking pictures. They don't go there for the landscape, or they don't go there for the architecture. They don't leave whistling the architecture. And no, but you have to have it.
Right.
It's an important part. It's not all about the movie star.
Right.
Casablanca isn't all about the stars
that
are in it. And same with Wizard of Oz and all of that. It's the blending of it all.
Yeah.
That makes it timeless and repeatable.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, you got me excited about 1967. Why don't you grab your goggles and why don't we head back? Joe, why don't you try to meet us in 1967 at Disneyland, and let's check out New Tomorrowland and the new Pirates of the Caribbean.
And go inside the unbuilt haunted mansion.
Yeah, the haunted mansion too. That doesn't open for 2 more years.
Yeah, but the elevators were in.
Oh, all right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
And
Thank you.
Becky, take it from here. We're heading off. See you guys
All
later.
right. Sounds
Bye.
good, guys. And we hoped you guys enjoyed the ride. Thank you so much to our longtime friend, Tom Morris, for traveling with us today. If you have questions for Tom, stick around for our live Q&A in just 60 seconds. On behalf of Zeitgeist Design and Production, we thank you for spending an hour of your time with us today on the Spirit of the Time Zoomcast. If you enjoyed the journey, please check out all 33 of our time travel adventures on our YouTube channel or under the Zoomcast section at zeitgeist-usa.com. They're also available as podcasts wherever you listen. Now, open your diary and plan to join us on Friday, April 19th, when our passenger will be the former creative leader of Paramount Parks, Herschend Family Entertainment, SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment, and Carnival Cruise Lines, Anthony Esparza.
Get it.